Okay, so the intent here today is to try to take you through some information relative to the proposed referendum. The referendum was pushed forward by the Board of Education, and it will be on the ballot November 8th. Our goal is to tell a little bit of the story of how we came to be here today. So in a nutshell, we had a referendum back in April. That referendum was not passed, and so we expanded the planning team. We tried to get a little bit more diversity. We tried to increase the participation so that we could have a broader scope of people helping us to reflect on the work we had done previously, and also to review the survey data that we had received from the communities that we serve. Common Falls School District is made up of 10 different communities, and a lot of folks gave us feedback on why they felt the referendum didn't pass last time. Ultimately, we listened to what they said. They said, you need to reduce the amount of the ask, you need to really focus on the middle school, and then any other key pieces. So one of the first things that they figured out was the planning team went back to try to understand why are we having the ask. And the thing that you need to understand is the way a school system is able to maintain their infrastructure is not the same as a business. So if I run a business, I have an ability to build that into my budget. When I work with people right now for operations for the school district, there's some actions that we have to purchase. I just signed some here recently. They range from 2.5% to 13% increases because they're experiencing increases in their costs. The cost of fuel, the cost of people. We don't have that same ability. We get a certain amount of dollars that's given to a school district, and that's what you have to stay within, regardless of what happens to the cost of living or prices of fuel or anything like that. So to the best of the ability of the school district stayed within their budget, which meant that sometimes they had to defer their maintenance. What you're seeing in this picture right now is an example of a Kewanee boiler from the early 50s. That's what heats this building. Now, I will tell you that it's an extremely well-built boiler. If you could continue to buy parts for that boiler would most likely outlast me, okay? With that stated right now, the only way that you get parts for that boiler is to go online and buy them used, because you're not able to purchase those. They're not making those parts anymore. Now the good news is we've been able to do that. That's what we've been doing for multiple years. We go on eBay, we find somebody that's ripped an old boiler out of some other school, they maintain some of those parts because they knew that somebody still has them out there, and they can sell them to us. And it's worked. With that stated, the amount of challenges that we have requires some type of action. That planning group had to look at what are the options. And one of the options was looking at, do you try to fix all the things with this building, or do you try to look at a different course of action? The building is made up of multiple additions. So the additions started back in 1913. There's additions in the 50s. There's additions since then. Every time you put an addition on a building, one of the challenges you have are the roof lines. Anybody that's involved in construction, especially in northern states like ours where you have frost and you have heaving foundations, it's hard on buildings. Well, this building, because it's been built in some cases more than 100 years ago and parts of it 50 to 70 years ago, we didn't have the technology that we have today back then. One of the pictures that we have in this right now is one of the technology stacks. So we're to the point right now where every student that's in this building has a one-to-one device with them. In order for that device to work, you have to have the infrastructure to support that. So this is an example of some of the infrastructure. Now, that technology stack has to remain cool. If it doesn't remain in a cooled environment, it'll overheat, then it won't work. So we don't have AC in this building. So what we've done is over the last few years, in certain classrooms, we have put air conditioning. And in a classroom that has air conditioning, then you'll put in a technology stack and you'll build a closet. It works. However, if you have a need to go in and work on that stack and it's during that classroom, you're going to disrupt the learning in order to get to that so you're supporting anything else going on. The other thing is, as you have roof leaks, which we do, we had a situation here not too long ago where we had the roof leak and it just happened to come down about 4 feet from where this stack was. And I can actually show you this. We'll have an opportunity to do a tour a little bit later tonight. It's just down the hallway here in the 6th grade wing. Feel very blessed that that leak didn't come down 4 feet away from where it did and drop right onto that stack, because that'd be tens of thousands to replace that. It is what it is. What you're going to see is we continue to do the best that we can with what we have. Many of us are taxpayers, we understand the expectations. But in a nutshell, there's things that occur that are outside of our ability to foresee it. Back in November of 21, there was a steam pipe. In some cases, the blueprints that we have are not fully accurate. You will have what the blueprint was, and then in the building process, they had to make a modification for whatever reason. I wasn't there at the time. This one, I'm pretty confident, was done in the 50s. And a pipe was underground. The pipe actually came over this corner, and it ended up going into underneath that locker room. The way we found out that we had a problem is the locker room floor was brought to our attention that it was getting hot. Now the good news was it was in a corner, so we didn't have kids walking over the top of it. If we had, it would have been a problem. But that steam pipe got to the point where it just disintegrated and burst. It caused us to lose heating in one of the wings of the building. Well, the good news, it was in November and not January, so the cold of the winter hadn't gotten too ridiculous yet. But what we'd have to do is we had no heat capability there. It took about 3 weeks for them to take that down, dig it up, fix it, replace it, and then get it back online. During that 3 weeks, what we'd do is at night, we'd crank up the heat elsewhere in the building and use barn fans to blow it down into that wing. And we were able to keep it in the low 50s during the day. The other areas of the building were very warm, so some people were uncomfortably warm and some people were uncomfortably cold. But we made do with the best we could. The maintenance and the repairs that we've been doing, some people will say, Dean, I don't get it. I mean, we've done multiple referendums. Why are we doing another one? In the last 5 years, we've been wildly appreciative of the referendums that have been approved because we've been able to work on some of that deferred maintenance from the past. So we have been able, I brought with me, in case you want to look through it later, about 12 pages of some of the work that's been going on in the last 5 years. We've done some of the roof work. Any of the shingle work in this area of the 4 buildings, you'll see it's already been done. If you go down to Abrams, about 90% of that building's been done. If you go to the high school, about half of that building has been done. Flooring, doors, windows, lighting, plumbing, electrical, a lot of different work throughout the district. With that stated, some of it is work that you cannot accomplish with an operational budget, even when it's had the support of a referendum. An example would be when you start talking about HVAC and ripping out an entire system like this, there's asbestos all throughout those Kewaunee boilers. So you're going to have to do significant abatement process along with that, which makes the time required go significantly up and the cost is significantly more. We have a picture here. These are 9-inch tiles. These are right down the hallway, and they're throughout this building. These are back from the 50s, and these are all asbestos tile. Now, asbestos is a word that gets people anxious. Asbestos in its normal state is not a medical issue. Asbestos becomes a problem if you're not wearing abatement type equipment while you're trying to work with it. So if you're going to rip this floor up and then take a sander and sand down all the adhesive and get that asbestos moving in the air, you're going to have on abatement equipment. Guys will come in with respirators or gals, and they'll have everything plasticed off and taped off, and it costs a lot more to then go through and replace that floor. So as you can imagine, you're trying to make that floor last as long as possible, and being thoughtful about what are you going to do with the dollars that you have. In the last few years, the work around the district, the question is how much do you invest into Washington Middle School if you're potentially going to need to do a major overhaul? You want to be thoughtful of that, and that's something that we've been trying to do. The teaching spaces you're going to find tonight, first thing you'll probably notice, or maybe you won't, because you have to kind of have a comparison, is the size. When our schools were built, we had less kids in the classrooms. So just back in 2015 here at Washington Middle School, we had 19 or 20 kids, sometimes 18, in a class. Right now the average is about 26 or 27 to 1. When you have 26 or 27 to 1, that means sometimes you'll have 22 and sometimes you'll have 30, because it doesn't work out perfectly because you had kids wanting to take different classes. So some kids want to take different electives, and depending on how many go to a different elective, that affects their English class. Well, now you'll have situations where a class that was designed to have 20 to 23 kids in it has 30 kids in it. So So they're packed in there pretty tight. The other thing you'll notice is that there's things within each one of these classrooms that's at end of life and then some. We have situations right now in our science classrooms where the plumbing doesn't work. So you have sinks in there, they don't work. When we looked at, well, let's replace them, let's fix it. Well, when you start looking at the fix, some of the plumbing, it's not just the plumbing that's within that fixture in that classroom, it's the plumbing that's running all the way throughout that area of the school. So they've shut that down, in some cases, many years ago, and they haven't used that for a long time. These are things that, at the time, it was the best they could do with what they had. Gas, same thing. If you're in a science classroom, when I was a science teacher, I needed the gas, because we had Bunsen burners that we were doing demonstrations in labs with. Right now, that's not an option in some of our classrooms. They have to do it with the hot plate. They have to use the electric. Some of the common areas. Everything is relative. The good news is, I think for the most part, our people are very thoughtful during drop-off and pickup. But that doesn't mean that it's what it should be. So when we come here, kids are going and getting in and out of cars, and they're doing so on a two-way traffic street. If you were to design something, you would never do that this way. You would do something where the cars would come off in the street, they would come in, and you try to have them more than likely in a one-way flow, and you would have kids where they're not weaving in between traffic to get it on and off the sidewalks. Right now, the way we do it, because it's what we have streets going around the school, we have the bus traffic and the parent traffic separated. But even in doing that, you can see from some of the video clips, you'll have young people and they get out the left or the right side and they'll walk through traffic to get to the sidewalk. Now, we try to teach them to do it thoughtfully, but they're kids and they don't always listen and do things the way we'd like them to, and it's not always as safe as it should be. So that leaves it up to us, the adults, to try to be thoughtful of how we can do some of these things. Our playground right now, we call it a playground. The reality is it's a blacktop space where kids can go out and enjoy themselves for a little while. There's not much green space that we have here. It is what it is. I mean, we can always point out something that's worse, but if we have an option to do something better, that's what's being presented to you, the taxpayers. I will tell you right now that the first time I heard this, I didn't think I heard it right. And I asked the kid, I said, "What'd you just say?" And the kid said, "Well, we're going out to the yard." "You mean the playground?" And the kid said, "No, to the yard. You know, like they have in prison." And I kind of said, "Come on, really?" And they went, "Well, Mr. Hess, that's what they call it." Okay, well, that kind of bums me out, because I don't really want kids thinking that I'm sending them out to the yard, okay? But I tell you, when you look at it, I understand why they say what they say. One of the pictures here is actually right through that doorway. It's a locker room. Just gives an example of one of the many leaks that happens when it rains here. There's a big windstorm and you drive around Washington, you can actually see shingles that are down on the yards and out on the streets. We go out, we pick them up, and then we go up there with shingles and tar, and we do the best we can to get things patched up. This is one of the hottest topics. This is a concept, or another person said to me, maybe use the term example. This has been one of those things that really is stuck in the craw of some of our folks that said, "Dean, I gotta tell you, I can't be supportive of something that's not on a blueprint." I get that. I understand the concept behind it. No pun intended there. But a blueprint has a significant dollar value to it. Like more than $1 million. And so I'll use this last one as an example. Had we done a blueprint and invested $1 million and then the community members go, "No, we're not supporting that." Now you have $1 million invested in something that you're not going to do. And even if you can use part of it, you've still, in my mind, wasted taxpayer dollars. You're welcome. Come on in. Come on in. Come on in. Come join us. You're fine. So instead, it's kind of backwards from what you would probably do if you were building your own house. I get that. But again, the financing is different too. Before I go to build a house, I gotta make sure that I have the funding there. Well, we're doing the same thing. Before you can get very far into a school, you have to make sure you have the funding. And the only way to do the funding is through a referendum process to get the taxpayers to give you that feedback. Here's the other piece. You're not gonna build a building without a significant process to get input from the people it's gonna serve. I am not gonna make the decisions about this. This is gonna be a team effort. I'm only gonna be here a short time in comparison to the age of a building. This building, right, the one we're standing in right now, parts of it we're gonna walk through tonight are more than 100 years old. None of you were on the planet at the time that was built. Many of you were not on the planet at the time the one we're standing in was built. My point being is, it's gonna take 6 to 8 months of gathering feedback from community members, from parents, grandparents, from students, business owners, to give feedback. And I'm gonna tell you, it's gonna be an arduous process. I've never built a house. I did a significant remodel, and my wife and I, our marriage made it. It survived. But I'm here to tell you, it is strenuous when you're trying to decide what kind of cabinets are you gonna buy. What kind of poles are you gonna get on the cabinet? Which way is the door gonna open? What colors are you gonna use? This is going to be demanding. And I would imagine that not everybody's gonna be happy with the outcome. But we will try to find consensus, not agreement. You try to get as many people involved as you can and get their feedback and then go with what you think is the best plan. Only then do you really start moving forward. One of the things that somebody caught me and said, you know, Dean, I noticed there's not an ag room on the concept. And they said, we are gonna have ag at the middle school, right? I said, yes, we're definitely having ag at the middle school. There are things that are, this is just an example. So please, please know that I don't think this is what the middle school is gonna look like. I have no reason to believe that right now. This is just an example. And it scares me to put this up there because I'm worried that some people are gonna say, hey, you put that up there. That's what it's supposed to look like. This is just a concept of somebody else that does this for a living. One of the key areas that we're asking for in this referendum is entryways. These are 3 examples of our entryways. One on the left-hand side is O'Connell Falls Elementary, one in the middle is the high school, the one on the right is this building right here, Washington. In each one of these situations, what you can see is once the person walks through the door, they have access to our children. Now some people will say, well, I thought you already had secure entrances. We have electronic access right now, which is one step better than what we used to have. It used to be that you would just key open the door, you'd leave it open for about 15, 20 minutes while the kids were coming in, and then the custodian will come through and lock it back up. Now what happens is, it's locked, it electronically opens at a certain time, or you can use your fob to get in. When a person wants to come into our building during the day, that door is locked. We have cameras co-located with our entries. They push a button, person in the office can see them, says, good morning, how can I help you? Hey, I'm here to see Miss Landerman, the principal. They say, come on in. They electronically open up the door and the person walks in. But as soon as they walk through that door, they have the option to take a right into the office to go see Miss Landerman, or they can walk straight ahead down the steps and walk right into our building. A secure entrance would be, this is the example of Washington. You would probably look at designing something so that there is literally a wall going to have to be put in place, so that as somebody walks in, they are only able to go right into the main office. Then we have to have another, hi, how are you? Good. So you're here to see Miss Landerman? Yes. What are you here to see her about? Does she know? Do you have an appointment? I'll get her. I want you to have a seat. Can I get you some water or something? Great. You have a conversation before they go anywhere. For them to actually walk out into the school, a person at the desk has to unlock the next door to let them out. So it's much more controlled. It's a more vetted process. So we do not currently have a secure entrance. We have electronic access. Secure entrance is something that we need. I'll go one step further and tell you that if we don't pass the referendum, we're still going to need to do this work. We're just going to have to use some Fund 46 dollars to make it happen. But this is critical. We need to make this happen. Roofs. This is one of those dollar items that it's large enough that you can't nail it down with your operational budget. It's something that schools do every 25, 30, 40 years. I'd like to do it as long as possible before the next one. But what you run into is flat roofs, pretty expensive. We have the ability, we've done the shingle roofing. We just got done talking to you about that. If you look around our district, you can see the new shingles. But with the flat roofs, the dollar values are too costing for our budget to handle. Now, that doesn't mean you have to continue forward with the flat roof. You have choices. So I just got done telling you that if the referendum passes, we would go through a design process. There'll be choices. With that stated, every one of those choices will have a dollar value attached to it. And so if you go with a higher cost option, then you're gonna have to adjust some of the other wants within your design, because obviously you gotta stick to your budget. Some districts have gone with metal roofs. I've seen that. My understanding is it's a significant up cost to go with that metal roof, but you also have the potential that it will last longer. So that will be something that the planning team will have to figure out, put a proposal to the board, and then those are things that I would anticipate the board will take action upon. The planning team, both last time and this time, came to the same conclusion that when you start looking at the cost of bringing this building up to addressing the most critical needs, and that's like the most critical needs right now. So we only looked at like in the next 5 years. If you go out further, and what I mean by that is there's an audit report, it's like 335 pages, and it's on the web page of the referendum. It would be more than 70%, like way significantly more. Just in the next 5 years though, if you just did the most critical pieces within this building, it would be just a little above 70% of the cost of the new building. Now once you're done with that, you still have a building that's on a very small piece of property here in town. You don't have the green space. You're still gonna have some foundations that are 100 years old. You're still gonna have challenges that come along with the bones of this building. Which is why that group of people decided they were gonna move forward with a recommendation to the board of building a new building. We've had some people say, why 90 acres? Person said, do you really need 90 acres? No. Back when I first started looking into this 6 years ago, I went around and asked people, how much do you have? How much do you have? In a lot of cases, it ranges from 20 to 40 acres. And they have very nice facilities. It's wonderful. However, a piece of property came available. What do they say? Location, location, location. It's literally right across the street from current buildings. And at the time, it was a large piece of property. The district decided to put a bid in on that piece of property. Having more than you need, not a problem, in my opinion. You have an ability, you can always, if you want to sell that, you can do that. Since buying it, the district has already had the city come forward and ask if they could buy a piece of it, which they're in the process of doing that right now. And that's a good thing for the community because the city's trying to be thoughtful of the electrical needs in the future. If they weren't doing that, that could be a problem down the road when the community grows and needs a greater amount of electricity and then it's not available. By the way, the guy that I'm working with is sitting right over there, so thank you, Mr. Combs. We appreciate that. We talked a little bit about this is an overhead that shows this site within the residential area. This shows the picture of the property that's just to the east of the high school and O'Connell Falls Elementary that the school district purchased. And I say purchased because part of those operational dollars allow the district to buy that and then pay it off early. So again, some of the things that people may or may not be aware of is those operational referendums allow debt to be paid off more quickly, which saved the interest on those loans from the past, which is, from a taxpayer standpoint, I'm appreciative of. This goes into a little bit about why was the site selected. I told you I was a former science teacher. I'm thrilled personally by this site because if I was a science teacher at this middle school, I would be having my kids go outside regularly. I'm confident that if a school is built here, you're going to have some type of a retention pond, almost guaranteed. As part of that retention pond, I see all kinds of environmental classwork that I could be doing there. You also have a diverse biome there. You have a bunch of redwood and white pine, red pine and white pine that's growing up on the far side coming out of the low ground. You have agricultural studies, like literally right out the door. It's a neat piece of property. It is an opportunity that a lot of people don't have. So from an education standpoint, it can make learning much more interesting for kids. This is the ask financially. So previously the ask was $49,900. We listened to the community members. They said you need to reduce the ask. It's too much. They said focus on the middle school. That's what the focus is. One of the things they said, we were uncomfortable last time you didn't build the demolition into the budget. It was built in there this time. So that $35,500 for the new middle school, that includes the demolition. Now maybe you don't need full demolition. We won't know that until we get to that point. If the referendum passes, and then you get into the process of building a new middle school, and you build that school, you need to then convene a group of people again, just like the planning team that we've been using. You'll have to have another team of people to identify what are some potential courses of action for this building. Who knows what it'll end up being? Maybe you're able to sell this building. Maybe you're only able to sell part of the building. Maybe a person says, well, I'm willing to take, the last two additions, but I'm not interested in the other parts. Who knows what ends up happening, but you have the funding built in here to raise the entire thing. What we are committed to is not just leaving it and becoming an eyesore in our community. So the board has already had those conversations. They don't want this to become an eyesore. So maybe it gets demolished, and then maybe it gets turned into a park. Maybe it's purchased by someone and they turn it into residential. I don't know. But a group of people is going to have to come together and look at different options and then pitch that to the Board of Education. The two other things we talked about, being roof work and secure entrances, are listed there, and you can see the amounts. Yes, sir?
Why do you need a new roof on the elementary school? That's only, 5, 10 years old?
O'Connell Falls Elementary.
Is that a new school over by the high school?
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad you brought it up just the way you brought it up. Because that's exactly what happens in life. We blink and years go by. It's my understanding that that's like pushing 30 years old. So that was brought in the mid-90s. And the priceless part is, when I left Wausau, I used to do the same thing. I said, well, yeah, I used to work over at Horace Mann, at the new building. And the people would look at me and go, you mean the one that was built in '93? And I go, oh yeah, that one. It just gets away from us quickly with buildings. So, and it's a great point, but when you start looking at things that are 25 or 30 years old, some of the pieces within these buildings are actually reaching end of life. And you gotta look at replacing them. How does it affect people's taxes? So here's the piece that no matter what, the taxes are going to go down. Well, let me restate that. No matter what, the mill rate's going to go down. So the mill rate, right now, if it passes, is still going to go down 37 cents per thousand of assessed value. Which means if I have a $100,000 home, and if my home is still evaluated at the same $100,000 a year later, then the taxes for that piece of property will be $37 less from the school district's portion of that tax. I put those couple qualifiers on there because one of the things that's happening right now is property values are going up. So we just got word that across the state of Wisconsin, it was like 14 to 16% increases average across property. So if that mill rate goes down, but your valuation goes up, your taxes still could go up, okay? But the mill rate goes down no matter what. So that mill rate, if it passes, $37 per 100,000. Now, if it doesn't pass, it goes down $2.62 per thousand, which again, on that $100,000 house, is $262. Now, I had somebody on social media go, holy cow, Dean, that's a lot of money. So ultimately, if my house is worth $300,000, I multiply that by 3, right? Absolutely, you do. So we're not hiding anything here. This is what we understand is going to happen based on our forecast model. But if it doesn't pass, the thing that needs to be understood, this building is still sitting here with the needs that it has. The interest rates continue to go up. The cost of building materials is not coming down. What we're seeing right now is everything is just more expensive. So the price to do this today is significantly more than a year ago. It will be more next year. We have every reason to believe. So no matter what, mill rate goes down, but it goes down quite a bit more if the referendum doesn't pass. I understand that. But then our needs are still here, and we're still dealing with the challenges that we have. We talked a little bit about this, what happens to the current building. We get together a group of people, we start planning courses of action, getting input from as many different people as possible, and then we go to the board with what we think is kind of a T-chart of pluses and minuses of the courses of action. This is the question that's on the ballot. So on November 8th, people will go to wherever they go to vote, and in a nutshell, this is what it asks them. Are you in support of this, or are you not in support of this? And then they make their decision. Again, it's focused on middle school, on roofs, and secure entrances. You can either go to the oconofalls.referendumfacts.org, which is a website that provides you with information. You can use the QR code. We've tried to think of questions that you might have. We've taken questions that people have asked us, we've grouped them all into the frequently asked questions section and provided answers. If they're not in there, ask us and we'll get back to you, and then we'll add, because if you were thinking of it, well, somebody else might have been thinking of it as well. A couple different things that came up. So some of the feedback last time is people said, not really sure that you were thoughtful enough or whether or not you planned for this enough. All I can tell you is my reality. I joined this team in 2015, and in 2015 I was made aware that this was something we needed to be working on. However, in 2015 we started recognizing that we had some serious operational needs. And in the first 9 months on the job, we identified that we had a $650,000 fiscal deficit. We laid off 9.5 people to balance that budget. There wasn't any other option, because for multiple years, the board had been working to make cuts as far away from the classroom as possible. That's where that deferred maintenance comes in. We couldn't defer anything anymore. So we had to cut people, which meant that some of the opportunities for kids went away. We balanced that budget, and then we looked at the next year. That fiscal pattern only got worse. When we looked at what the state was coming in and what the taxes were coming in, we were going to have twice that in deficit. So then we went out to the community and we said, you have to make a choice. If you'd like us to try to sustain what we have, here's what we need to do, or we're going to have to do some significant cutting again. The people came forward and they supported an operational referendum, and I am wildly appreciative of that, because that meant that we could avoid losing all those opportunities for kids. With that, we were also able to start addressing some of that deferred maintenance. That's what helped to pay for putting shingles on some of these roofs. That's what helped to pay for replacing some of the floors and the doors and the windows. But it wasn't enough to do all of it, okay? We had to be thoughtful of how much we asked for. So we tried to find that middle ground where people could be supportive and we could start doing some of the work. At that time, we said to people, if the way we basically fund public education, if it doesn't change, when this one drops off, we're gonna have to come back and ask again. And that's what happened. We did a 5-year, And as we approached that 5-year, we looked at it, the funding hadn't changed, and we asked people, can you do this again? And people said yes. So that we can continue offering the opportunities for kids. And that's what we're doing right now. But now we have this capital piece. This has been thoughtful since 2016. We've been looking at all of these, what we call a forecast model, the dollars that are coming in and the dollars that are going out. And we have been paying debt off early so that we could have this happen in this window of time and potentially replace debt with declining debt so that you don't have a mill rate that's jumping up and down. So here's what's going to happen. How can I say this? Most people in my position want to try to keep a steady mill rate because we all, me included, we establish our personal budgets and we don't want to see our budget jumping all over the place. By having that mill rate stay stable, I don't see a significant change in what I'm paying for my house taxes. Well, let's say that the referendum fails. I'm all of a sudden, I'm a taxpayer in this district. I'm going to see a windfall of taxes that I don't have to pay. But the concern with that is, right now, this could be passed and I would experience a serious difference in what I'm paying. But if it doesn't pass, then I get this taxes back, and now 2-3 years down the road, when I've gotten used to taking that money somewhere else in my budget, now somebody comes and asks me for that. Now that's different. I've already reallocated those funds out of my personal budget somewhere else. Now, I'm not trying to convince somebody yes or no. I'm just trying to throw out there that this is what I've observed. If a school district can keep a steady mill rate, that's a positive thing. So when people say that we haven't been fiscally thoughtful about this, I guess what I would say is if you disagree with the thought, I can respect that. But to say that we haven't been fiscally thoughtful, I don't believe is a true statement. We've been very thoughtful for about a 6-year period of time, literally right down to the time that we were making the ask and the time that it would be affecting everybody's mill rates, i.e. the taxes. Now people say we don't agree with that. Okay, that's part of the democratic process, so I get that. So I wanted to bring that piece up. What questions do you have?
I have one.
Yes, ma'am.
Why is Abrams Elementary secure entrance more expensive than the high school or the elementary school?
It has a lot to do with the entrances and what's around them. So how much electrical, how much conduit is being run through the walls right around the doors that they're at. Are they going to have to move some plumbing? So we're trying to keep those numbers as low as possible. In a nutshell, what they're looking at doing is just changing where the entry doors are. And so in some of these buildings, it'll be a little bit simpler than it will be in a different one. So that's the way it was explained to me by the people who did the bid.
Because I know that's just been a new office in the last probably 13 years that they did that in Abrams.
They just moved the office a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, it's a couple years ago.
Yeah, it's only been like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yep, because what they did is they moved the office over to that side. Which the good news is where the office is right now will be a lot easier for us to make that into a secure entrance. We wouldn't have been able to do a secure entrance the way it was before because the office actually was an interior area.
Right.
Like you had to walk in probably 20 feet and then move over. So right now you could actually look at putting a door right on an exterior wall to try and make that work. So that's the good news.
I see and you told me it was conceptual,
Yep.
but if the referendum passes,
Yep.
you're going to take something like this and pass that on to an architect to start off with. I'm looking at that design, and it's a sprawling design, and it looks like a very expensive design. When I look at the ones that are being built in Greenville and Appleton, all of these, they're much more compact design, and therefore cheaper to build, cheaper to maintain. And so why haven't we gotten well, if you take this design, the architect's going to go with it, or at least try and go with it. Why are we using this as the basis for starting?
So you have some really key questions that we don't know the answers to right now. So I'll give you an example. And there's a gentleman from Nexus sitting back here, and Steve, you can dive in if I get sideways. But a perfect example is, what do you want, okay? So some people will say to me, Dean, one of the first things you better keep in mind is O'Connell Falls Elementary is bursting at the seams right now. So you at some point may have to think about, do you have to maybe bring a grade level up to the middle school? And if you need to do that, you better make sure that whatever you have for a design is going to have an easy way to put an addition on there. Okay? Well, you better be thoughtful of that though. Some people will say, is natural light something that's really important to you and your community? Do you want natural light coming into your building or not? Do you want your building to be 2 stories? Because it's a lot more economical in some ways to have a 2-story building than to have a 1-story building. There's positives and negatives that come from that. A portion of that example is 2-story, okay? The aesthetics, how concerned are you of the aesthetics or not? And all of this is going to have to be bantered about and find some level of common ground before the architect can get very far into their work. That has not happened at this point because I'm talking about a lot of effort and hours and time that people are, I don't anticipate people are going to want to invest that time until they know that it's actually going to happen. It's very difficult to get people in this day and age. People are busy. They're working multiple jobs. They have children. They have investments in community activities. So your point is spot on. I absolutely understand what you're saying. But I also think that you're going to have to figure out what are the people who are voting this, what do they want to see in their building?
So how can a dollar amount be gauged when you don't know what the building is looking like?
It's primarily based on square footage, and you're looking at, so Nexus right now has probably been involved in building multiple middle schools in the last 10 years. And so they can take a look at, this is what it costs us, and I'll call it the middle of the road, okay? Because you got good, better, best.
Okay.
Well, when we all go to buy something, whether it be cabinets for our kitchen or a car or whatever, we tend to tell people, well, what are my options? Well, here's a good option, here's a better option, here's a best option. Well, depending on my budget, good might be the best that I can afford. So when we go to the school district with Nexus and we say, well, we don't need a Taj Mahal. We need something that's good, that is going to last and provide our kids with a great education and is sustainable, and that our taxpayers feel they can afford. So then they give us a quote. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I would just say too, just so the gentleman knows that concept drawing came from an architect that does K-12 buildings across the state of Wisconsin. So it's one in their portfolio. Again, we need to make sure that the public is involved in the process of getting what you want as a taxpayer. Okay? So I just want to let you know that that was done. It wasn't just somebody drawing a picture. It was done by an architect based out of Green Bay that does work across the state of Wisconsin in the K-12 market.
In my mind, whatever we end up with has to be the right answer for the O'Connell Falls School District.
Right.
Okay.
But I'm going to say this. I live in the country. I grew up in the country. I've lived in the country most of my life. I'm miserable in the city. I don't like living in the city. I like living out where the birds are chirping and I don't hear highway noise. But there's other people, probably sitting right here, who enjoy living in the city. They like having their neighbors, and they take them soup, and they take them pie, and they have fun with their neighbors. Everybody's different. The interesting part with that is we're all going to come together, and we're going to try to come to consensus on a design that we can all feel good about. It's going to be a process.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Do you have any comments, Dean, on, people have questioned the land being outside of the city of Tunnel Falls that is currently in style?
So the question that Anna brought up was, the question has been posed, that land is currently in the town of Stiles. It's not in the city of O'Connell Falls. So we have talked with the city about this a couple of years ago, before we even got involved in this. I had a conversation with Stiles as well, and it's my understanding that if this were to be passed, then those two entities have to work together to determine how this moves forward. And it can be something that is done where there's agreement, or there can be actions that are done even if there isn't agreement, okay? So I guess I don't want to get too far down there, but it's my understanding that there isn't a legal hitch that would stop this from moving forward. And this has happened in this exact area, it's my understanding, with the hospital. So it's my understanding that was something that had to be annexed into the city years and years ago. So it's a political process that we would have to go through with the municipalities to accomplish that. I'm showing some level, this is an area that I don't have a lot of experience in, but I've talked to the people who do, and they're telling me it's not an issue, it's just a process that we have to go through. But that is a true statement, it's currently in the town of Stiles. Yes, ma'am?
Dean, can you talk about why we decided to move forward with a new middle school and not a new high school?
So a question had been posed, why did we decide to move forward with a new middle school versus a new high school? To take that one step further, somebody said, why don't you just take the high school that we have, move the middle school kids into it, and then build a nicer high school? The cost for a high school would be significantly more. I can't give you an exact amount, but I would be surprised if it's 30 or 40% more than this or more. And we know that right now the feedback from our community was we needed to reduce the ask, not increase it. So if we had gone very far down that road, I think it would have been very quickly a fiscal problem for most of us. We're trying to be thoughtful of taxpayer dollars. And the need is actually in middle school, and the middle school is more functional financially. Any other questions or thoughts? Really appreciate you investing the time to be here this evening. It was a beautiful night, and I was worried because I thought it's this beautiful fall evening and people are going to want to be out taking a walk with someone or their dog or just hanging out and enjoying the night. So I appreciate you coming here and investing it with us. If you would like to do a walk through the building, I would be happy to take you for a tour. Just stick around. If you have already been through tours or you don't feel the need to do so, by all means, enjoy the rest of your evening. Please share the message with other folks who weren't able to be here. We're doing some recording this evening, so we'll put that out for folks who couldn't make it. But let people know what you heard and guide them to get onto the webpage where there's more information. Yes, Jim?
If people come up with questions after this or once they've gone home and talked to their friends and family or coworkers, where should they go with those questions?
So a couple different options. They can either call our district office and we'll take the questions and then we'll get the answers and get back to those people. We will then add that question to frequently asked questions. I think that's probably the easiest way, so just call the district office. By the way, that number is 920-848-4471. Got it right?
I just got one quick question.
Yes, sir.
With the price of everything
Yep.
is going up. Nothing is stopping. There's no end in sight for inflation. What happens if let's say you get the school built,
Yep.
and then the rest of your list, there's no money left.
Yep.
Right before this last referendum, there was the news, just the night before the referendum, the news showed an Oshkosh school $6 million over budget, and they just had the framework up.
Yep.
$6 million over.
So this question came up a couple different times. So first off, we built, I guess I'll call it a inflation factor into those numbers. We've also then built a secondary inflation factor into those numbers. And then you also have to just be thoughtful of the fact that if it goes beyond what you've already planned for, you very well may have to adjust your plan.
But does that mean going cheap with flat roofs that we gotta fix in 10 years? Does that mean,
It'll mean that you'll have to make some type of a concession.
I mean,
And that's unfortunate because that's what happens quite often.
I know it does. I've
It's-
been around the block.
Yeah, I mean, it's, by the same token though, to not do it at all is a problem as well. I mean, I agree with you. I have anxiety about, this is a large project.
This flat roofs in Wisconsin ain't the answer.
Well, I don't disagree with you. The place where I came from a middle school that had metal roofs. Horace Mann in Wausau has metal roofs. But I will tell you that then you have to do something different in the rest of your project. So it's one of those things where it's a give and take. I mean, I think we've all probably done that with our own purchases, whether it's our own home or a vehicle. You know, if I wanted something, I gave up something else to get it. But I will tell you that in the years that I've been here, we've been very fiscally thoughtful. During this time, we've been able to pay some things off early. We created a Fund 46 for future maintenance. We built up our fund balance so that if we have some of these issues, we do have some ability to respond to it. A greater ability today than we had 7 years ago. So I'm very thoughtful. I always try to plan for the worst
I do too.
and then hope for the
I
best.
have to.
Yeah. So
Is this school going to be air conditioned?
the middle school, if this is passed, the middle school will be air conditioned.
Only one in the district, right?
Well, there's partial air conditioning in the high school right now. There's some air conditioning in this building with the classroom units that we've put in. For the most part, this one is not, no. And the elementaries, it's partial.
It is.
Yep, there's some areas that are air handled with air conditioning, but yeah, it's not the whole building, no. No. Did you have a question?
Your total cost is $37,630,000. What was the original planned amount and what did you eliminate?
The original was 49.9, and we were going to address a whole lot of work in each of the buildings. And so pretty much everything was cut except the middle school, the roofs. So it's a lot easier to tell you what wasn't cut. We had an addition that was planned to go on at O'Connell Falls Elementary, because I just got to tell you that O'Connell Falls Elementary right now it's at capacity. There was going to be a cafeteria. It wasn't an addition, but it was a cafeteria repurposing at Abrams. There was going to be a change in the traffic loop at O'Connell Falls Elementary. They were looking at the potential of tech ed wing and an ag wing addition at the high school. They were looking at changes to the LMC at the high school. Those things are still there, but they're not going to be part of this referendum. It'll have to be something maybe for the future. But, I mean, as things go right now, I'd say that that stuff's up on the shelf. So, right now we're trying to focus on our current situation, and I appreciate you asking. I can get back to you with a more specific list if you'd like. Yes, sir.
You know the difference in cost just in the last 6 months between the middle school that was planned on the original referendum to what it is now? If we were to,
I try not to think about, so the question was, do I know what that cost was for the middle school before versus what the middle school is now? So, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I can get pretty close. It was about 29 million or 29.5 million 8 months ago, and right now they're looking at about 34 million.
It's about a $4.5 million.
So when you start looking at the difference in interest, that's why we were trying to go originally when we went, because we wanted to catch that low interest rate. When you start talking about borrowing 30 or 40 or $50 million over the course of 20 years, a change in interest from 1 or 2% to 4 or 5% is pretty significant.
When you're mentioning the interest rate, We know that it's predicted to go up, but what happens after November 8th, and we haven't started the school yet, and it keeps on going up, how are we gonna borrow that money?
Well, you can actually start the paperwork to try to get locked in. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks for that to happen. So you can imagine we're doing everything we can to front load that so that you're ready if it decides to be passed. And then what ends up happening is the school district would work with a financial organization to help us decide what is the outlook, and because depending on what you think is going to happen, and obviously this is not exact science, you're kind of looking at all the different financial data to decide, do you borrow it all and lock it in at one time, or do you borrow it in pieces? And that's a risk that you have to try to take. The good news, I always try to look for some level of silver lining, is when you're borrowing that money, you can then also get a little bit better interest rate because you're going to invest some of it while you're doing that 24-month build process. So you're going to get a little bit better return, but you're also having to pay a lot more for it. So it's a give and take. Any other questions? All right, I really appreciate your time tonight and your investment. Again, if you'd like to stay for a tour, stick around. Otherwise, have a great evening. Thanks for coming. This is all asbestos tile, and at the point where if we have to replace this tile, they'll have to go through an asbestos abatement process. I've seen that done in a different building, and usually it's a multi-month process because you're going to come in, you're going to set up all the abatement. Everything is going to be plasticed off, and nobody's going to be able to be coming into these areas while that work is being done. You can see kind of somewhat of the size of the rooms. If you're in a school that's built today, the classroom will be half again bigger than this. And again, at the time that this was built, you would have 16, 18, 20 kids in a class. We can't afford to do operations like that anymore. And so you're having to increase the pupil-teacher ratios, which is tough. You can step in here. This is actually a science classroom where I was working at the fair, and Mrs. Rowland gave me a call and said, did you hear about my classroom? And I said, no. She said, well, there was a leak, and she said I came in to get prepared for the school year, and multiple little ceiling tiles were actually down on the desks. Unfortunately, they had just redone the wax in this room, so you can see if you ever had water on a wax floor, it all turns white and everything's got to be redone. It's just one of those things. Unfortunately, when it rains really hard here, this building leaks in a significant number of places. And
I was a student here in the 60s. And in this section, I remember these rooms. Now my grandson is here. And that traffic thing out there, is anybody that hasn't seen that needs to see it. When you leave kids off, it's the worst scenario you could ever see. With the buses, two-way traffic, the kids crossing in front of it, it's crazy. That alone is.
So Dean, I'm not sure if you mentioned, these two are the rooms that are above the boilers.
I did not.
Why they have
I did not mention that.
the air conditioners that they use in the winter. If that would be the opposite of what you're thinking, you know, we talked about when the pipes aren't, you know, when the pipes weren't working, and the opposite of what I'm about to say now is there's classrooms that are above the boilers that need to use the window air conditioners because it is scorching hot in the rooms, like unbearable. We have to cool the rooms down.
So one of the things about those Kiwani boilers that we mentioned is they're really good boilers.
Oh, sure. They were built sturdy.
They were built to last a long time. One of the not so good things about those boiler systems is you don't have the ability to adjust those the way you would an efficient system that you have today. So when you turn those on, what ends up happening is proximity of the boiler. You get a lot higher temperatures here than you do in other areas of the building.
And we're pretty thoughtful about when we turn those on, because
Can't turn them
We
on and
have-
turn them off and turn
You
them on and turn them
can't.
off.
We have to make sure it gets pretty cold consistently in the fall, because once they're on, they're on. You don't turn them back off until the spring when it's warm again, so, yeah, you don't turn them off and on.
You can't turn them off and on like that. So ultimately, what she's saying is if you work here at Washington Middle School, and I'm chuckling because middle school I was at previously was the same way. In the fall, we're all putting on layers because we know that if we turn it on and then you get those really warm days in September, you're gonna be dying in here. It's gonna be 90 degrees in your classroom. So, yeah. So we
Isn't
have-
that one at St. Anthony's? I think that was, the school was built in 57, about the same as, and they had a giant boiler like that too. Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that we brought up in the informational sessions, we talked about the tech closets that we built into the classrooms. So that's an example of a tech closet. So behind that locked door is where you have a big set of switches and cabling that controls the infrastructure for your technology. If you look over on this wall, these are the radiators that help bring the heat from those Kiwani boilers into all the different classrooms. These radiators have exceeded their life expectancies, and so periodically we have radiators fail. And similar to the boilers, we have to, in some cases, bring people in, and they have to manufacture the part in order to fix them. So they do the best they can. In some cases, if it's going to take a few days to get fixed, then we have to move that class to a different area of the building for a long time to get it back up and running. And again, you're dealing here with the same flooring that you've seen throughout the 6th grade wing. So, and again, the size of the room. If we need to get 28 or 29 kids in here, it's pretty packed. Are we ADA compliant? And the answer is we are ADA compliant because you can enter and exit our building without dealing with stairs. However, this is something that we really need to address because if somebody's coming through our main entrance, you'd like them to be able to access just like all the other folks, regardless of whether they're in a wheelchair. You don't want to say to them, well, you're going to need to go use a different entrance. So regardless of what happens with the referendum, we need to address them. So this is the HVAC that we were talking about. These are the Kiwani boilers that run the system. One of these boilers heats this building. So what happens is you'll bring one boiler online, and you'll shut it down, and bring another boiler online, and you'll rotate it, okay? You come around here to the front. Our maintenance team does, in my opinion, a fantastic job of maintaining these systems. So as you can see, very aged plumbing and pumps and valves. What happens is you open up these doors and there's a bunch of tubes inside of there. Those tubes will, over time, burn through and they have to be replaced. So we have re-tubed these multiple times since I've been here. We keep track of the work. We try to, budget for your needs in the future. But ultimately, the efficiency of these boilers, it's extremely inefficient in comparison to what you would do today. When they replaced something like this, because they did it at a building that I was at previously, the boilers were probably 3 times this size. It was a much bigger building. They replaced it with a unit that was half as big as this workbench. So a boiler that was 3 times this big was now a boiler that was that big. And this boiler, we would be able to program from anywhere on the planet that I could get online. So I could literally be on vacation and I could get online and I could adjust the heat in the building versus here you have to come here and do physical changes in order to change something. And here you make the change and it maybe takes effect 8 hours later versus here you make the change and it's almost as quickly as you can input it. So it's a whole different beast of what we're working with. Now, I'm very appreciative. They're fantastic boilers, like I said. If we can continue to find parts, we can make them last a long time. But they definitely have challenges.
I take it that's asbestos around there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So all this work would have to be an asbestos abatement process. One of the changes that, or one of the challenges that was brought up earlier was in some of these rooms, they were at one time, like this is an ag room, right next door is a science room. And usually in a room of ag or science, you're expected to be involved in some lab activities with kids and some demonstrations. And so usually you will see sinks in those rooms, you will see gas valves capable of Bunsen burners and things, usually some type of electric outlets on islands. And so back in 15 when I arrived at the district, one of the things that was brought to my attention and I looked into it was we didn't have some of the sinks weren't working. And so I thought, well, we'll just go ahead and we'll fix those. Well, one of the things that we very quickly understood was it wasn't like it was just the plumbing that was related with that fixture. There was plumbing issues multiple steps down the line. And so the decision had been made that that was going to be capped off and that wasn't going to happen again until there was a major overhaul of the building. So we've just learned to live with that. That's kind of been the process. And you can get by with a lot of things. But at some point you start to try to then look back at how many things have you decided to get by with. All of a sudden your labs, you don't include different activities because some of your equipment just doesn't work. Well, we need to address some of that. At Adams Street, and if you've driven past this portion of the school, you'll see that there was some changes made that were safety related. It couldn't wait. You'll see that now there's a ramp on both sides to allow kids to come up. There's multiple steps that go down so you can unload like 4 buses at one time. Now you have runoff that comes down from the roof and it actually goes underneath the sidewalk rather than across the sidewalk. Because it used to be that kids were slipping on the ice and you've got a bus that's right there. So there has been major changes here to try to address that. With that stated, we still have a lot of changes that we need to continue to work on. So this is the art classroom.
I remember in 50, so.
And so again, I bring you in here because kids love this class, but the size of the area, again, this is one of those smaller rooms where you get 28 kids in here. How do you make that work? Especially when you're asking them to spread things out and be working on a project. And then when they get done, you gotta have a place for them to put the project and for it to still be in good shape when they come to get it the next day. So they do the best they can with what they have. So up here you can see, this is the concrete structure that supports the second floor gym. And so that cracking that we were talking about, we've actually been marking it. You can see that one's dated 2018, so we can kind of see where the cracking is and whether or not things are expanding. So up to this point, knock on wood, the cracks seem to be stabilized. So they're not growing at this point, which is a good thing. Again, this is something that we keep a close eye on because it's pretty concerning.
Probably steel ended up cement.
Well, I would imagine that there's steel and concrete together, yeah? Yep. Well, this floor is better than the one that we just walked out of. This is a great floor. Yeah, that floor downstairs is. So this is used as a secondary playground, so on days where it's raining outside, kids can come in here and play. It's used for activities. It's also used for some of the after school. I think wrestling in some cases still uses this. So it is a used area. It is a beautiful floor. I mean, to get this floor today, it's expensive. It lasts forever. But as you can see, the rest of this area it's in need of help.
You know, the PA system when it rains, or it's like just some structural things. In the video, when I talked about, it was the classroom right here on the right, when I talked about, you know, when there's so much more heat, when there's this many bodies in a classroom, Well, after I watched the video, I realized that you weren't standing with me and feeling that heat at the time. Like, I really didn't explain that it's like 80 degrees in that room right now, and I actually went out in the hall to talk on the video because like I felt like I almost couldn't breathe. It was so hot in there. I mean, it was like, it's almost suffocating. It's so hot.
I believe it.
And another thing is, it depends on the time of day. So the playground is right there, and it's blacktop, and the sun comes in. So for the morning, he runs the fan in the room, and then when the sun hits the blacktop and that comes into the room and makes it hotter, then he puts the fan in the hall and blasts it in the room, because then he can get the air. I mean, it's probably 10 degrees or more difference just standing in the hall. So then he can get the cold air from the hall into the room. So it's just a lot of things like that it's just structurally you can't fix, you know, just because of the logistics of what we're working with. So it's some of those things, you know, Bob talked about how the number of emails that go out saying, I found a door that was unlocked. Don't forget that when it's humid, the door structures adjust and you have to pull the door closed because otherwise they'll stay open. That's a major safety concern, you know? So it's just some of those things that we kind of just do. And then when I talk about it with someone else, I'm like, oh yeah, we do send those emails out reminding each other that the doors don't lock when it gets hot. And then they sometimes lock better when it's cold, or some of them it's worse when it's cold. But we know which ones they are, so
But
it's okay.
You live it, so you don't
Yeah.
realize how ridiculous that sounds.
Right,
when you
yeah,
actually say
because
it.
we do the best we have with, we do the best we can with what we have.
Every space where internet is powering phones, access points, cameras, doors, kind of a lot of our security, that's part of our door access system there. This is the battery that keeps the whole thing running. So kids could literally just unplug it and then there it goes. And there. But this was a storage unit when we first came in. This is where, you know, before I even got here, it was built to this area. As things expanded, you needed space for a room. We couldn't put them in any of the actual custodial closets because the humidity is so high in those rooms that it would not only void the warranties of these things, in fact, they're usually too hot or too moist in some cases where they completely malfunction. So we've done the best we can to try to keep them secured, but again, things that normally should be completely off, like out of the, it shouldn't be anywhere near where students are just right out in the open where they learn geography. Our main distribution frame, we can go in that room if you want, but it's in the band room. One of the practice rooms in the old band room. So in order to get in there to do any of the work, if we have an actual issue or we need to address it physically, sometimes we can't wait because all the phones, all the access points, and this whole wing are tied to this area. So I can't really, I just have to interrupt them because all the rest of the people can't answer their phones or do something else over here if there's an actual issue. Same thing with band. We just kind of have to go in there in the middle of it, and hopefully they're not practicing too loudly if we need to talk to a consultant about what's going on in there. But that's also where the fiber comes in that specific room to power the fiber for falls and the bus garage. So it's a pretty important connection to be able to have, and it's right in the middle of the classroom.
We really appreciate you investing your time with us tonight to try to better understand the challenges that we're facing and get information related to a potential solution. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks.